I'm gonna let you guys take it over and have fun with this panel. Happy belated birthday, Shannon, and good luck.
Thank you. Determined to get that happy birthday in there for me. Appreciate it. Hello everybody. I think we're yeah, we're at time. We're at time. So my name is Shannon Ross. I'm the founder of the community and gonna go through a couple elements here before we start the panel. Thank you for coming to our session today as part of Stop the Stigma Conference, hosted by Muxie Educational Services and the community. Um, the other hat that I kind of wear in addition to my work at the community locally, I'm a consultant with the McNeely Prison Education Consortium in Southeast Wisconsin, where we are working to offer degrees for people who are incarcerated and formerly incarcerated. At Stop the Stigma, we acknowledge the importance of person first language because language shapes how we understand one another. Person first language centers humanity over diagnosis or system involvement and reflects our shared commitment to dignity, respect, and equity. We also recognize that individuals may prefer identity first language, and we encourage speakers and participants to honor personal preference whenever possible. We'd also like to begin with a land acknowledgement. Although this conference is held virtually, we acknowledge the indigenous peoples whose lands we occupy as we gather, learn, and collaborate. So the community is headquartered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, on the traditional homelands of the Ho Chunk Nation, the Menominee Nation, and the Potawatomi, with enduring ties to the Ojibwa and the Odawa peoples of the Council of the Three Fires. Is that better for folks? If anyone can like just maybe in the chat, let me know if that is any better. I can switch to a headset as well, but I'm gonna I'm gonna keep going with this. So
This is the interpreter. If
yeah,
you could switch to a headset, it may be
okay,
really beneficial. It's
okay,
difficult to hear you.
that is fascinating. Let's see if this works a little better. Okay. Um, okay, let's see if this works. So better, yeah. I MacBook is not living up to its standards right now. All right, apologies. So Moxie Educational Services is based in New Hampshire on the ancestral lands of the Abenaki and Pennacook peoples whose histories, cultures, and sovereignty continue today. We honor their resilience, ongoing contributions, and enduring relationship to the land. This acknowledgement is only a beginning. We encourage all attendees to learn about the indigenous nations whose lands they reside on and to support ongoing efforts toward indigenous justice and sovereignty. Accessibility is a shared responsibility as well. Thank you for helping create a conference culture rooted in respect, care, and openness. ASL interpreters are provided for each session and CART captions are activated. To support blind and deaf-blind attendees, we'll begin with a brief visual description. I'll go first, and then I invite each panelist to do the same. I am a light-skinned biracial male with a close-cut beard and very short hair. I'm wearing a black hoodie with the community logo on the left chest. My background is a row of hats below a row of books. We're going to get into the panel, and before the questions, I encourage the panelists to also offer a description of themselves and their backgrounds. So the topic today is reentry. Um, like I said, I'll kind of actually, you know what? I'm going to pause and let you both introduce yourself before we go into the questions. If you can go, Sharif, you want to go first, and then you can go, Philip.
Sure, that's not a problem. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sharif Brown. I'm the Director of Reentry with Alliance of Disability Advocates. I am a brown-skinned African American male with a red beard, wearing a religious gray Muslim kufi and a gray ADA, which is Alliance of Disability Advocates shirt. So that's who I am. And I will pass it to my brother, Philip.
What's up, everybody? I am Philip Cooper. I am a brown skinned Black American. I have a beard, salt and pepper beard, that is. I've earned these gray hairs over time. And I am wearing a hat that has the North Carolina license plate on it with the word Stigma Slayer written across it. And on my background is Operation Gateway, which is the organization that I founded and am the executive director for. And also on my background, it has our mission, which is together we leverage lived experience to transform lives and reduce the stigma of recovery and reentry. Pass.
Excellent. Thank you. And then this first question is an opportunity to talk more as well throughout the rest of the panel about the work that you both do. So the topic of reentry, First question we have to kind of open this up is how does reentry look different and often harder for people with disabilities compared to non-disabled returning citizens? I don't know if either one of you want to kind of go first on that, or we can kind of keep the same flow.
That's fine. We can keep the same flow. So that's a very, very good question. Essentially, this a reentry for anyone is going to be difficult, regardless of how much time that you spent behind the walls or incarcerated. Obviously, as the number of years increase and as the level of information decreases, obviously reentry becomes very, very difficult for what society establishes as a normal individual that does not have a disability. So now when you compound that with a disability, now the reentry is going to be extremely difficult because they're not going to have access to the same resources that another individual would, or even when it comes to their reentry plan. Like, how can you hand a reentry plan to someone that has a visual impairment and they can't see it? Or how do you hand a reentry plan to someone that has a cognitive disability and they don't really understand what's on the paper? So this multiplies the difficulty exponentially for anyone that has a disability, which is the reason why that population is the most at risk for reoffending and going back into, unfortunately, an incarcerated state. Philip, I'll pass it to you.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, definitely. How does reentry look different and often harder for people with disabilities compared to non-disabled returning citizens?
So when we look at I can even mention a specific example that I had to get brother Sharif to help me out with, but the pre-release planning is even more important. And the prisons now are short staffed. They're it's really challenging for them to staff the prisons. And so a short staffed prison impacts their reentry plans. And so I'll start out by saying for a person who may have a disability, right? It's even harder for them if there's no pre-release planning. We had a situation in where Sharif and I had to collaborate from, he was all the way across the state in the east, and I'm all the way across the state in the west. And we're trying to help a man who had a disability, who had a catheter, who was at a medical camp. We were trying to get a FL2 filled out because he needed to be in a skilled nursing facility, is what he really needed. He ended up getting dropped off at a hotel room by a probation officer. And all of this could have been resolved if medical would have been communicating with us, because we had identified a facility for him to transition to. And the only thing that was required, that was mandatory, that had to be done was an FL2 form. And so, pre-release planning is even more important for those who may have a disability before they come home, as it relates to housing and as it relates to continuity of care.
Yeah, that's great points. Locally, we have not, I would say, a great amount of services for folks coming home with disabilities, specifically around reentry. It's an area that definitely throughout the course of the time that I've been home trying to find better ways to connect and questions that come up. And it's an area I've been learning a lot about mostly. It's not an area that you don't think about when you come home. And if you're somebody who isn't necessarily in that, in that demographic, you don't always think about it. And that's for most people in society, right? So that's like the area where trying to find all these different pockets and elements that are not really thinking about that to highlight it more. So conversations like this really remind me of where I need to also lean in and challenge partners about where they're having their supportive services for folks coming home in those different regards. So the question after that is, why does disability compound reentry barriers around employment, housing, supervision, and healthcare?
So essentially, having a disability is going to compound all aspects of life, regardless of how you look at it. When it comes to housing, obviously, now looking for housing, that housing has to be actually be accessible in all aspects, whether it's someone that has a mobility issue or disability that has to have a wheelchair, or if they have to learn how to live in that environment with a visual impairment or a hearing impairment. So housing is always going to have to be one of those resources that are going to have to be fit around that individual that has any kind of a disability. Transportation is another one because obviously the majority of individuals that are coming home from prison are not coming home to a car and a set of keys waiting for them. So these individuals are now coming home and they have to learn how to be able to access their community. And if you've been incarcerated for 15, 20 years, that environment that you're returning to with or without a disability no longer looks the same. buildings are in different places. Bus routes are either new or have been discontinued. So now you have to learn how to be able to get around. So learning how to ride the bus system with someone that has a disability, regardless of whatever it is now another barrier, which is why I'm so happy that my program offers travel training to actually teach individuals with disabilities to learn how to be able to utilize the fixed route system. And it's not just getting on the bus and winging it. You have to have a plan before you even get on the bus, and a contingency plan if things go wrong when you're on the bus, missing a bus stop, missing a bus, anything like that. So all of that comes into planning even before you even get on the bus. Unfortunately, a lot of individuals that have a disability that are released into society, they don't have access to this particular plan or this program that I have, or they don't know about it, or they just try to just go about their way on their own, which is great. We want everyone to be as independent as possible, but you have to take into account that safety is always going to be the number one barrier or the number one concern when it comes to people that are traveling in society with a disability. So like I said, having a disability is always going to compound and make things even more difficult for any individual, but especially when it comes to housing and transportation. Employment is another one because unfortunately, a lot of these second chance employers are not really equipped to deal with someone that has any kind of a disability, even though they are federally regulated to provide reasonable accommodations for the population that they're hiring. Unfortunately, individuals that have disabilities, sometimes their jobs are going to be mundane and going to be just mediocre, and it's not really a career. It's more of a job at that particular time. And those employers really don't give those individuals the opportunities to excel in their employment because they're thinking about they only can do A, B, and C because of what their disability is, instead of looking at what their ability is and then forming a job around that. Philip?
Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate the mention of of employment. Employment gives a person a purpose, and I even know people who have a disability who receive a check and they still want to work. They still want to do some work, and it's compounded because when we look at one of the evidence based statements about recidivism, saying having gainful employment is a way to reduce recidivism. So for a person being able to have a job, it's not just for income, but it's also therapeutic. And when we look at employment, and even if it is something that's part-time, it gives a person a purpose. It gives them some additional opportunities to engage and build community, even at work. Because, we spend a significant amount of time at work. And though a person that may have a disability may not be able to work the same amount of hours, they still can have some consistency with relationships. And we know, looking at social determinants of health, social and community context is a social determinant of health. So that limits their access. And as Sharif had said about, them not second chance employers not being able to accommodate a person who has a disability. And there are programs, like, let's be clear, there are programs that can be used to support our people that are coming home with a disability. But watch this. It's going to go back to that pre-release engagement. If we got pre-release engagement, we can already be getting these brothers and sisters connected to, in our state, it's called Employment with Independence for People with Disabilities, EIPD. Don't ask me where the long name came from. Just know it's formerly known as vocational rehabilitation. And if a person is going to engage with EIPD, formerly known as Voc Rehab. I'll call it Voc Rehab for right now because I know this is national and a lot of people are more familiar with Voc Rehab than they are EIPD. Um, if we was to start that process while they are still in prison, as far as it relates to getting them engaged when they come home, okay, when they come home, then they can come right home to like an appointment instead of like the intake appointment. Because anybody who has engaged with Voc Rehab in the past or even presently know there are a couple of appointments that you have to do before you can secure what they call a technical internship. And a technical internship is when Voc Rehab has funding to pay the individual. The job gives the individual task that they can do to learn a new skill, to get a certificate, or even to just have a paid work experience. But if we are not intentional about pre-release engagement, right, assessing their needs, individualized re-entry plans, having that documentation ready for, because they got to have their paperwork on their diagnosis, and all of this can be sent to the people by case managers. I mean, that's what case management is, right? But it has to happen pre-release. And so on the employment side, I like to remind folks that even people who have a disability still like to work. And at Operation Gateway, we have one person on our team that can only make a certain amount of money per month, that can only work a certain amount of time. But the person still likes to be around. Even when they're not working, they still like to be around. You see, they still enjoy being amongst their peers, especially in our workforce, because we're like a peer support agency. Human services is what we do. So you got a whole bunch of helpers hanging out with each other and working together. So it's a beautiful thing, right? And so even when she is not, or dang, I was trying to keep it like without being able to try to guess who the person is, HIPAA or whatnot. But even when they're not on the clock, they still like to be around because it's community. And it's just like I said before, social and community context is a social determinant of health. And then as he transportation, he handled transportation pretty good. And I'll also say, like, when we look at food, access to food. So when you look at the housing piece that we have in North Carolina, oftentimes people who are less fortunate, they go stay in what they call halfway houses. When they go stay in halfway houses, they're still responsible for their own transportation. And so they can't just get on the bus. And even the people who do have to get on the bus, you don't catch them catching the bus to go get groceries. Thank the Lord that Operation Gateway receives state dollars from the Department of Health and Human Services to be able to provide peer support services for these people. Because if we didn't, how would they go get a food box? And then some people have a charge that disqualifies them indefinitely from being able to get food stamps if they got caught with like a drug sales related charge. So then they got to go to food banks and stuff like that, right? So how will they do that? It's even harder for them if they have a disability, especially if it impacts their mobility. And so that's my 2 cents on what it's like for those with disabilities coming home.
I just
That
want
is
to piggyback
excellent for
on
sure.
what Philip said. First of all, he eloquently painted the whole picture out. I couldn't have did it better myself, brother. Everything really revolves around this whole pre-release resources that unfortunately 95% of the prisons in North Carolina are not offering. And nationwide, I'm pretty sure it's the same thing. And a lot of people that don't realize why this is, if you go back to the history of why prisons were invented in the first place, and how they're a billion-dollar business, and how they're in contracts with all of these big manufacturers that are producing household products and items that the majority of society are using and have no idea where it's even being constructed. In order for you to run the machine, you're going to have people there to run that machine. So why would I offer you any kind of pre-release services that I know is going to benefit you from not reoffending and coming back when I need you to reoffend and come back, because I need you to help me run this billion-dollar business? Essentially, prison nowadays is essentially just modern day slavery. I'm pretty sure Philip can tell you, people are being paid 35 to 40 cents an hour for items that are being sold for thousands and thousands of dollars in society. And it's going to continue to be that way until society decides to stand up and actually do something about holding these prisons accountable. They call them rehabilitation centers. There's no rehab going on there at all. It's essentially hold you, release you. It's a catch and release, almost like a pond in fishing. We're going to release you and then catch you back, and then release you and then bring you back until you just give up and say, you know what, prison is where I want to be, because it's too difficult to be out in society without any real supports. And this is the reason why programs like mine and like Phillips are so important. Even though we work on two different ends of the state, collaboratively, we are crossing in each other's backyards with certain cases as we bounce certain cases off of each other. But just goes to show you that, there are some resources out there that would really do genuinely want to really help the population try to remove the stigma that they have right now.
Yep. No, that's a great point. There absolutely are. Something that you both have been talking about with this, and to highlight, May in the comments made a point that really aligns with what you were talking about, Sharif, with the employment and people being given, and both of you actually talked about that, and how folks are put into boxes, even sometimes shuffled towards employment options that are not even helpful towards their reentry or reintegration, or where they are, in their life at that point, especially. And I know one thing that you both have talked about with the pre-release part is really huge, with the work that, I've been focused on a lot of my life with our pre-entry of not focusing on people when they're about to come home or after they've come home, but like way, way before that. Ideally the second they enter the system. While we're both trying to eliminate the amount of people who are inside, we can also focus on helping people be better prepared, and that requires a connection as soon as possible, as their path towards the end game is getting closer, and there's a plan there and preparation. So definitely appreciate you highlighting both of those. The next question is kind of a tie-in with the same topic, kind of going back a bit. What does the lack of meaningful programming or accommodations during incarceration, how does that affect people once they return to the community?
Essentially, you're releasing someone with essentially no training. Think about it like trying to ride a bike. If someone handed you a bike, if you never rode a bike before, and there's no training wheels on it, and you get on that bike, you're gonna fall 99% of the time because you don't have the training or the support to be able to hold you up until you learn how to balance yourself. And essentially, that's what this is. I mean, I know it's a minute and a real elementary type of connection, but if you think about it like that, that's essentially what it is. If you give someone the training wheels or the support before they get released, once they do get released, then they'll be able to balance themselves and be able to hold themselves accountable and be able to run their lives the way that they want to, if they know where all of these resources and these opportunities for supports are pre-release. Because if you're waiting until someone gets released, there are so many other anxieties that are involved with reentry that I'm not thinking about resources as if I have to think about where my next meal is going to come from, or if I have to think about where am I going to lay my head tonight? Do I have to sleep under a bridge? Am I going to go into a homeless shelter and get violated or get beat up by somebody that's in there? I'm not thinking about these other resources. I'm thinking about my survival once I get released. So having all of this information and these resources already lined up for you essentially before you even get out lowers that anxiety. And now you know that I know where to receive these resources. I know who to speak to. And we're not talking about just cold calls. We're talking about actually forming plans to where that individual knows exactly who they need to contact. And that person on the other end is actually waiting on that phone call from that individual or from a community connection like mine and Philip to connect them to that. So if you can do that, then that person statistically shows that they have a better opportunity at being successful with their reentry than someone who is released just essentially with no training rules or supports.
Yeah, and I will go right back to the case management side. And here in North Carolina, you'll hear some of the OGs use the word programming. Programming, case management, they're used simultaneously, right? Interchangeably. Um, that's where we struggle with programming, with case management. And it goes right back to the staffing piece. There have been times that I'll meet a solid case manager that's sending me an email. I'm like, wow, they emailed me, and we're communicating via email, and it's a beautiful thing, and they're actually a humanizer, a people first kind of case manager, and in my mind, I'm hopeful that they're going to stay. But oftentimes, those type of case managers don't stay working there too long before they move on. I believe there's a culture inside the penitentiary as it relates to the staff. I believe that there's a culture of punishment. And the goal for us would be to move from punishment to rehabilitation. And that could take a long time. But I'm always tell truth when I have an opportunity on a panel like this, and that's what a problem is. The problem is with the programming. Because if those programmers, if those case managers were intentional, if they were intentional about engaging with community-based organizations like Sharif and Coop, then we could collaborate on the reentry plan. It makes their job much easier. We know the resources that are on the ground, and sometimes reentry guides are outdated. There are times where you'll see a list that they give out and the numbers aren't correct. The same person's not there anymore. I mean, you can even see these lists in North Carolina. You can go online and you can see a list if you're dependent upon that list and it not be up to date. That recently happened for me for an anonymous county, and I actually got the list off the state's website. Okay. And when I went to contact people who were engaged or active members of that quote unquote reentry council, the person didn't work there anymore. Nobody ever answered the phone. The email bounced back. Like these were my experiences. And this was with me basically doing the work as if I was working inside the prison. And so that's where we have to face our attention, especially for people who may have a disability, because even on the people who have the if they get a check, right? Their check stops when they go to prison. We got two of them right now, fam. We got two of them right now. Two of them waiting on their check. If certain things, if they could have been engaging with certain people to be working on their case before they got out, their situation could have been much better. But now they're out and we're spending and we're fine with, I mean, it's state dollars, but the good thing about it is like, I'm not the kind of guy that's going to try to flaunt like we're doing everything successfully. I'm going to talk about what we're not doing successfully and then tell why. And one thing that we're not doing successfully, y'all, is we're not successfully supporting the people who have a disability unless we go against what our contract says. I had to amend our contract, and anybody in the nonprofit world knows when you have to amend the budget or anything with amend, it can slow down when you get reimbursed. And for a smaller nonprofit who gets reimbursement grants, that means when we had to make an amendment, it slowed down us getting paid for the work that we had to do. But we had to change saying we were only going to spend X amount of dollars on each individual, X amount of dollars per person, right? We had to change that because our brothers and sisters who come home who have a disability, if they're waiting to get their check, where is their income coming from? And then it goes right back to another thing that you asked earlier, as far as it relates to the employment. It's not like they're gonna go and get gainful employment to be able to afford paying for the halfway house. And so we chose to amend it and say we're not putting a cap. It's gonna be case by case. And we had one guy, man, we ended up spending $3,000 on housing for him, right? $3,000 on housing for him, and that's $1,000 a month for those that need to know how much it is per month. The house that we had to get him in, Sharif, we had to be intentional about not letting him go to just any halfway house because all halfway houses are not created equal. And so for him, we wanted to make sure we got him in one of the nicer houses that had more oversight, that actually had some type of staff involvement. You know what I'm saying? And so we got him in that house, and it was $250 per week. And so we ended up kicking out $3,000. And so on the programming side, if they are intentional about pre-release engagement, and you're going to hear me say this probably on every question that you ask, pre-release engagement is the major key. And until we resolve that issue, we will continue to do what we always have. And if you keep doing what you always did, you keep getting what you always got.
Let me piggyback off that, Philip. You said case management is definitely going to be one of the main issues. Very politically correct. I'm not so politically correct. End of the day, a lot of case managers just don't care. And that's just what it comes down to. They don't care. Essentially, they're just waiting to get them off their caseload so they can refresh their list and have someone else. Now, granted, they're vastly overworked, vastly underpaid. We understand all of that. However, if you're going to do your job to the best of your ability. And don't just depersonalize that individual and look at them as just someone that you're ready to just get rid of. Because once they leave the prison, they're no longer your responsibility and you can wipe your hands with them and then wait for them to come back. Now, like Philip has said, there's been a bunch of individuals or case managers that I've come across that actually really care about the work that they're doing. And they really genuinely want to help the people that they're serving because they don't want them to return back to prison. They've actually reached out way before they got released, connecting with me so I can give them resources and things like that are, like Philip said, are actually relevant and not completely outdated or just a generic Google search. And now you're shooting in the breeze to see if this actual resources are actually effective and operational or not. But I've had a bunch of case managers that will contact me when that individual literally is on the bus going home. And it's like you knew 90 days out that this person was being released, and you wait until 9 minutes before they get on the bus to start trying to create a home plan. It's never going to work if they have that mindset. So I agree with Philip wholeheartedly. Case management is always going to be one of the main struggles and the main reasons why people with disabilities are reoffending and going back to prison.
I'm gonna shift up the order here a bit. There's a question in the Q&A that ties to this topic really well. Is there anything else either of you would want to highlight around who else should be a part of the pre-release planning beyond case managers, or is it specifically on them?
Shoot, I'll say probation. And that's another issue that we have. And me being being a formerly incarcerated person locally, the probation and parole, there have been some people who had personal vendettas against me. Being a justice reform advocate doesn't, it doesn't equate to having allies that are probation officers unless they're like pure-hearted probation officers who are really for the people. And I mean, not saying that they're bad, but what I will say is you won't find a lot of probation officers that are going to be supportive of a justice reform advocate. And so it has been hard for me specifically, and I had to get out the way. Like, I done passed the baton as it relates to reentry. I done passed the baton locally because there was like vendettas, but having probation involved is the major key because, like he said before, the case managers know what's going on and when they getting out, and probation know who's supposed to be coming home within a certain amount of time. So they definitely need to be a part of the conversation with probation, but it does not remove the need for having a community based organization. You got to have those people who are boots on the ground, whether they're community health workers or peer support specialists or both. But you have to have those people involved, and you have to have somebody who is able to handle the communication via email, making sure the appointments are made, holding the medical accountable at the prison. So medical is also another ones that you got to have because, like, for example, me and Sharif, if y'all would, I wish y'all could have seen that what we had to do. That's how I even met the brother Sharif. We advocated like crazy for this man, and this man had a catheter. He had man, it was a couple of things he had going on with him, man. But they needed to have a FL2 for him to go to this housing, and the case manager couldn't complete the FL2. So having the probation officers involved and medical involved are two more people definitely got to have outside of case management.
On top of that, definitely you have to add in DMV. Definitely have to add in Medicaid. You definitely have to add in SNAP for those who are applicable to receive. And the case managers have to know, and you'll be surprised how many case managers don't even know what felony will eliminate you from certain resources. They have no idea until they reach out to a community resource like mine or Phillips, and then they recognize that certain felonies will eliminate you from certain state benefits and resources. But that definitely needs to change. DMV definitely has to be involved because state ID is one of the main things that someone has to get when they get released. Medicaid for individuals that have disabilities is vastly needed. And unfortunately, the way Medicaid is structured right now, even though they have expanded in North Carolina, but the way that they're structured is that if you don't have a home address, you can't even get Medicaid. You can't even apply for Medicaid before you get released from prison if you don't have a home address. And unfortunately, over 50% of the people that are being released with no home address. So now that individual doesn't even have access to Medicaid whatsoever. They're being released from prison with supposed to be a 90-day supply of medication, and sometimes that's not even the case. They might get a week supply of medication, and now you have to run around and try to find expensive medication because now you don't even have medical insurance because you can't get Medicaid because you don't have a home address. Once you get the home address and then you apply for Medicaid, it's still a 60-day wait to even get Medicaid or even to get a response from Medicaid about your eligibility. So it's so many barriers that are just lined up for people that have disabilities when they come out of prison, which is why, like Philip alluded to, the whole pre-release stuff is the key. Individualized reentry plans that my agency creates, that Philip produces, all of these are the keys to success. And I've been screaming about individualized reentry plans 10 years ago when I started my reentry program, and nobody wanted to listen. Nobody wanted to hear me. They didn't think that that was the best way to go when it came to reentry. Now everybody is recognizing that individualized plans are the way to go. And I'm looking at these people who were telling me no before, like I've been telling you this 10 years ago. Glad that you guys finally caught up. But think about how many people were missing, underserved during those 10 years when North Carolina is releasing 18,000 people back into society every year throughout the state. So I get off my soapbox for a second.
It's a heavy number, 18,000. Um, I want to switch to the conversation around the rural communities and what that looks like in those areas. And there's a question from Danny in the Q&A. So let me know, Danny, if this addresses that question after we talk about this a little bit. So what does reentry support look like in rural communities where services are sparse and non-existent?
Well, I'm gonna tell you like this: as a native of a rural, area, my family, from the countryside, Cleveland County, North Carolina, a little town called Lawndale. Okay, Lawndale. My daddy is from Cold Country, West Virginia. My mama dipped snuff. Okay, a lot of y'all city folk might not even know what snuff is. That's where I'm from. Whenever my daddy looked to start his life over, because see, my daddy is a Vietnam veteran who has a disability, who is also in recovery. He moved to Asheville, North Carolina, because Asheville has always been a recovery friendly area, right? It has all the resources that are needed for a person to thrive in recovery. I share this as a preface because our brothers and sisters coming home need to be intentional about where they release to. Sometimes releasing to a rural area is not what you need to do. At Operation Gateway, we have a state-funded program called Voices of Afralachia. So, Appalachia, but the emphasis on Afralachia because it's Black led. And I started that initiative because there are Black people, believe it or not, in the Appalachia, and we're here and we have people who are recovering out loud, but we still have a lack of diversity within the behavioral health workforce. So I started Voices of Afralachia so that we could start demanding what we needed as it related to our region, our Western North Carolina region, which is predominantly rural. What we found, my brothers and sisters, is a significant amount of people wanted to be in Asheville because they didn't want to go back to their hometowns because they didn't have the resources. I ain't saying that a person can't never move back to their rural area, because I know my homie Devin, who started Wilkes Recovery Revolution, now known as Recovery Revolution. She started out in Asheville in her recovery journey, and then she took everything that she learned, every bit of connections back home, and she started something in her rural area, and now they popping. Look them up, Recovery Revolution in Wilkesboro, North Carolina. I share this because my challenge for someone who has a loved one who is incarcerated, that has a disability, that is going to be returning, if there is a place who has more resources that they could go to, some type of residential program, I would highly recommend that instead of going home to a rural area. And rural areas have I would say that there's hope for rural areas if they have a recovery community, but most of the rural areas that I'm familiar with, they don't have that many resources, and you can't apply for grants your way into resources, right? I know that sounded crazy, but like money doesn't necessarily make a recovery community. And I learned this with the grant that we have from the Appalachian Regional Commission that was an 11 county project, right? And what we learned was that, we couldn't, even with the grant, you can't make an area recovery friendly. And anybody that's returning home from the penitentiary needs to go somewhere recovery friendly, because everybody coming home from the traumatizing experience being behind a cage is in recovery from something, whether it's trauma, post incarceration syndrome, anxiety, depression, PTSD. There are so many things that a person is recovering from when they come home from prison. And that means they need to go somewhere that's recovery friendly. And if a rural area does not have recovery resources, then my friends, it is not recovery friendly.
Absolutely. Definitely. Coming from New York, obviously, and then coming down here to North Carolina and going into these rural counties and seeing that there's absolutely nothing there when it comes to reentry services at all. There's not a local reentry council. There aren't any community agencies there that are offering any kind of reentry services. Sometimes there's not even an agency there that even handles an individual's disability needs and requirements. So going to a county where there's nothing there, which unfortunately a lot of these rural counties are, is probably the number one way for you to either reoffend and go back, Or unfortunately, if you look at the number of individuals who are overdosing once they come out of prison, the majority of these overdoses are in these rural counties because essentially there's no resources there, but there's plenty of drugs there for you to be able to get your hands on. And until the society and legislation looks at these rural areas, that we need to provide more resources and less drugs and narcotics and a lot of illegal activity, then it's going to continue to be the same thing. And it's not going to stop until legislation decides to want to actually pour money into these rural areas. But unfortunately, money is all about per capita. And because there aren't that many individuals that are living in these rural areas in relation to a metropolized area like the Triangle or Wake County or Orange County or anything else like that, or Charlotte, then the money's being poured into these major locations because that's where the majority of the people are. But if you underserve one person, then the whole system fails. So they're gonna have to pour in money into these rural areas so they can actually start coming up with community agencies and resources that help support individuals with disabilities that are being unfortunately released to these areas. Because unfortunately the way that the judicial system is that you get released back to the county where you caught your conviction. And if you caught your conviction in a rural county, that's where they're going to release you to. They're going to send you back there unless you have a home plan where you can go to another county. But that involves case management, that involves involving probation and parole, and all of this is pre-released, which just goes back to the case managers really not doing their due diligence. So none of that even operates and works for that individual. So until legislation wants to pour more money in and give more money into these rural areas where there's nothing out there, is going to continue to be a problem when it comes to reentry.
It's a problem here in Wisconsin as well. So, I mean, I would imagine across the country, trying to always find those best solutions we can as people doing this work to help people that are in areas that have less resources. So, the conversation across the board of the different states is very helpful in different areas. So, I've kind of got a couple of things on my mind as I'm just talking about this and some of the gaps that I've seen as well. So, this is appreciated conversation. Is there anything else that you both can think of as to how to address the disparities between urban and rural that hasn't been touched on? Anything else that you want to highlight there?
Well, I just want to make sure that people hear me say this because I'm very outspoken about this. And we're actually having a Western North Carolina reentry symposium on April the 1st. We are kicking Second Chance Month off the right way. And on April the 1st, we're having a Western North Carolina reentry symposium. And I got the good brother Brent Bailey, who is the coordinator for the Buncombe County Reentry Council, to MC the event. But I was intentional, Sharif, about making sure that we was going to talk about the rural experience because, like I say, in Western North Carolina, it's mostly rural, and you will have different organizations that are getting grants and contracts, and also our management care organization, also known as MCO or local management entity (LME). They have a new program with justice reentry. And so what they do with these justice teams is they have licensed clinical social workers who are working closely with those medical and social workers inside the prisons whenever they're doing their job, the social workers inside the prison when they're doing their job. And they're connecting with them. And so we're looking to highlight these new initiatives and what's working. We have a brother named Danny Hampton with Freedom Life Ministries who is really doing a great job with rural reentry, and he's organizing those good old church folks in the rural areas because that's what you do have. You may not have a lot of people in recovery in those rural areas, but you will have churches, and that is across the board. Churches are there. So if we can equip those churches, those faith leaders, and give them the knowledge and the skill sets that they need, they can also get involved. And many of them might not have records. And oftentimes people who don't have records have a better experience working with the system because the system, like people that have records like me, some of them still see me as a gangbanger. Like, man, I'm a whole lot of reverend, husband, father, mentor. Like, do you not see that? You know what I'm saying? They still know me from when I was in prison or whatever. And so having those churches and those faith community people get equipped, and we got to train those faith communities too. So wherever y'all are looking to engage the church, make sure they get the proper training and make sure they use the correct language because language matters. Like words hurt. Like you have somebody coming in talk about them old addicts or it's just people just don't be knowing no better. So but whenever we're organizing them and getting them involved in the work, we got to make sure we're equipping them with the skills and the language to use when they're working with our brothers and sisters that are coming home from prison. But in the rural areas, if you're not partnering with their churches, that is like the main one. And Danny Hampton has done a great job with that and organizing churches in rural areas. And the name of that organization is Freedom Life Ministries for anyone that's looking to check it out.
That's great, Philip. First of all, I didn't get an invite to that symposium, so you and I are gonna have to talk off camera about that. But yeah, I mean, I love the work that you're doing down there. Obviously, like you said, there's a lot of churches in rural areas. That's just the way it goes, especially here in North Carolina. Even though I'm not of that faith, it's all about helping people. So I really don't care what religion you are. It's not going to stop me from trying to help you link to whatever religion you feel like you want to practice. And obviously, the church is a staple when it comes to the community, especially when it comes to helping people. So I think that's a fantastic idea, is to educate the people in the church, because in these rural areas, that's where everyone's going to congregate to. They're going to come to the church to look for assistance and to look for help, because unfortunately, in the majority of these rural areas, that's really the only community agency that's even out there is the church. So I'm glad that they're doing that. Transportation also has to change when it comes to rural areas, because if someone can't get around, then they're going to be stuck in their house, and that's going to lead to boredom. Boredom leads to drug use. Boredom leads to a deterioration of mental capacity and mental health, and an increase in depression and an increase in suicide rate. So you're going to have some kind of a transportation system outside of a van coming to pick you up at your door 3 hours past the time that they're supposed to pick you up to take you down to wherever you want to get to. We're talking about an actual fixed route system that has more than one bus that runs every hour and then stops running at 6 o'clock at night, because people's lives don't stop after 6 o'clock. And that'll open up a lot of other resources as far as any kind of potential employment opportunities. So people will have the access to their community to be able to move around. I'm glad that I'm glad that Philip brought up the LME MCOs. They are doing stuff in prisons. Unfortunately, when it comes to the LME MCOs, for the majority of them, because it is Medicaid based, if an individual doesn't have Medicaid, they don't even have access to an LME MCO. And because it's Medicaid based and it's a fee for service, they're basing their numbers on the number of people that they see, and actually not the quality of the service that they're giving to said individual. So it's this reentry thing is a marathon. It's a real marathon, and I know I got my running shoes on. I know Philip has his on. You know, even though I might wear a size 16, you know, I'm ready to run and do whatever I got to do to try to get this thing going for people.
Excellent. Well, before we get to some of the questions we have here, is there a call to action that you both want to provide regarding for reentry providers, employers, policymakers, family members, whoever it is around doing better by disabled returning citizens?
Yes, sir. There's a call to action. They call me Reverend Philip Cooper. So let me take you to church. I ain't your average reverend. I'm going to give you the business. So the call to action is to my fellow leaders of faith. If you have church property, if you have unused church property, let's start repurposing it. Let's start building some housing. Let's start contacting HUD and going for grants and leveraging the property you have. Hallelujah. We can do this. The church, be good stewards of your property, of your resources. I've seen so many unused buildings, underutilized property in the church across the United States of America. My call to action, join us in this fight. In the Bible, you remember when Paul and Silas, where was they at? They was in prison. In Isaiah 61:1, it says that God has anointed me to proclaim victory for the captives, to set the captives free. You feel me? He has anointed me to do this work. And I believe that there are others like me who have access to property. Y'all, we can build something, man. If you are a leader of a church, you have a church building or fellowship hall or even houses that you have that are not being used. Contact your local justice professionals and say, hey, we have this property and we want to be a part of the solution, because we keep hearing that housing is a barrier. Let's create programs for these people. The call to action is for the church. The call of action is for the church. Hear me, hear my cry. Hear my cry, my fellow leaders of faith. As a man of God, I understand that I'm partnering with a couple of churches right now doing groups, but I know that there are churches that exist that have property that can be repurposed. So my call to action is specifically for my fellow followers of Jesus the Christ. If you have access and decision-making power over that property and over those buildings, Let's build something, y'all. Let's build some reentry programs. Matter of fact, let's cater it to our brothers and sisters that have a disability, because you heard that it's way harder for them. Let's do it. That's my call to action.
My call of action is for society in general to increase your empathy and understand that people that have a justice involved background is still people, and look past their past and look at what they potentially can do in the future. When it comes to employers, understand that the hardest working employer that you're ever going to have is someone that has a justice involved background, because they recognize what it is to have absolutely nothing. So just to give them that little bit of light, they're going to hold on to it with both hands and both feet, and understand that nobody on this world, on this earth, before us, after us, or us included, none of us are perfect. None of us are without sin. None of us are angels. None of us. And every single one of us has done something in our life to where if you got caught for that, you have been incarcerated. And every single one of us is one injury or one car accident or one step away from having a disability. So recognize that we're one step away, every single one of us. I don't care who's listening to this or watching this, no matter what state you're in. Every single one of us are one mistake away from being justice involved and one accident away from being disabled. And then when that happens to you, and then you recognize how difficult reentry is for someone with a disability, rewind this and remember that me and Philip told you it was difficult. Treat people with empathy. Understand that it shouldn't just be people that are either justice impacted or justice involved. It should be everyone, because everybody, we're all people. We're all people. And don't think that you're better than anyone because they have a record and you don't. Because obviously it's actually the flip side. They actually have more get right and more, essentially more morals than you do, because they're trying to change their mistakes instead of hiding and masking them because nobody sees behind the curtain. So just keep that in mind when you're dealing with someone with a disability and when you're dealing with somebody that has any kind of a justice involved background.
Absolutely. The one thing I would then add into that sauce that might be of help on my end is on our side, those of us that are advocates that are in this work, that are impacted, we need to have conversations and we need to be able to create dialogue as well. And we need to also extend that grace to the other people that are in the system, because you can't have the same integrity of language that is just towards you, but then not give it to those on the other side, right? So like that, those are standards I think when we hold, it allows some of that to be a greater dialogue, more effective. And, you know, it's more of a principle to stand on and say, we're doing exactly what we're asking for, right? So that's one of the things I think for us to also be aware of in this work when we create those conversations, instead of very justifiably getting very mad and walking away, or like cussing somebody out when, you know, when the dehumanization exists. So get it, but like it doesn't really help the work sometimes. So that's the one thing I see. A couple questions we have. One is a pretty straightforward one. It's for Sharif. Can you please define what a local reentry council looks like?
So essentially, a local reentry council is an organization that is actually connected to the Department of Adult Corrections or Department of Public Safety, whatever it is in your state. And essentially, it's a conglomerate of individuals that are responsible for supporting individuals when they come out of prison with reentry services, whether that's trying to find housing, whether that's job readiness trainings and employment. That's pretty much what they are based or what they're paid to do. They also have connections to transitional housing. So if someone is released to a transitional house, then for 3 months, they don't have to worry about paying any kind of rent for that transitional house because DAC or DPS covers that. And then the local reentry council can also supply an extra month of payment while they're trying to get them a housing resource or a better housing and long-term opportunity. Now, every single state and every county does not have an LRC. If you don't have one, advocate for one. Some LRCs are phenomenal. The one that I'm connected to here in Wake County is amazing, but I've seen some other LRCs that, like Philip told you before, you can't even get them on the phone, no matter how hard you try, because there's just nobody on the other end. So that's what an LRC looks like.
Okay. Awesome. And the only question we have remaining here, which I think would be a perfect ending to this to kind of clean it all up, is for both of you, how can reentry programs engage clients in a way to ensure individualization and not one size fits all plans?
Well, I don't know if you've heard the lingo that both Sharif and I have been using about individualized reentry plans. But it goes right back to, and I'm gonna sound like a broken record, pre-release engagement. That's the only way. Because like if they wait till last minute, they gonna just check, the case managers are gonna just check the boxes that they need to check, and that's it. But when you have pre-release engagement to, establish those individualized reentry plans, you can actually do a screener, and you can ask them all the questions that are about them and their experience and their mental health and their chronic illnesses and their workforce experience and their family reunification needs and their disability needs, all those things that are to them, right? So I would say this needs to happen pre-release, because by the time that they come home, it's too late. If we wait to start reentry when they come home, we have failed that individual. Pass.
Absolutely. It definitely starts inside. The best thing to do to make sure that these plans are individualized, if you have access to the actual facilities, go in and meet with these individuals face to face, and don't rely on the case manager to pass information back and forth, because you might not ever receive it in time to be able to create an individualized reentry plan. So if you have access to these prisons, and a lot of these prisons will allow volunteers to come in, as long as you go through the correct channels and the correct PREA trainings and things like that, they will allow you access to be able to come in and actually meet with individuals and actually speak with them on a one-on-one basis. And you'll be surprised how successful individualized reentry plans are, because that individual is essentially creating their own reentry plan. It's not anyone telling them you need this, this, and this, and this. It's more of, let me listen, unload on me all the needs that you have, and then it's my responsibility now to connect you to all the resources that you asked for before you get out. And once you do that, it eliminates the excuse for that individual of, well, I didn't know where this was, or I didn't know how to obtain this, or I didn't know there were agencies out there. You have all the information. It's essentially a red carpet GPS to where all the resources are in your community and in your county. So that's the only way to make sure that plans are going to be individualized, is one, on the outside, find an agency that actually does individualized reentry plans, or what I call an IRP. Find agencies that actually do that, and then try to connect with them to get them to go into your local prison or your federal prison to be able to give that resource of having an IRP. And you'll be surprised how successful it is. My program has served over 700 people in the past 10 years, with a 91% success rate of not having any one of our individuals go back to prison. And we're not talking about a 30-day window. We're talking about during their duration of being enrolled in my program, which for some people are years. 91%. The program in the format works, but society has to be receptive of what it looks like.
That is excellent success, right? Well, gentlemen, it's been an honor holding space with you about this topic. And if there's one segue, one line as we go to the next panel that comes up, is pre-release, right? It all starts there. The community, we call that pre-entry work. So focus on people as soon as possible to get them prepared, instead of just trying to, learn how to swim in a hurricane upon releases. The analogies so that I like to give. So thank you again. Ben, I'm going to hand it over to you.